What's up guys, Vress here with the latest episode in the series where we look at upcoming MMORPGs and try to work out whether they're worth getting excited about. Today we're going to be covering Bless Online. Now some of you may be thinking, hold up, didn't Bless release a couple of years ago? And you wouldn't be wrong, Bless did have an Eastern release in 2015 followed by a Russian release in 2016. However, both of these releases were pretty catastrophic failures due to the game being badly unoptimized. In fact, the Russian version of Bless only lasted 5 months before it was forced to close down. So now you've probably got a different question, and that's why the hell are you covering a dead MMO on your channel? Well, the truth is that the game did come pretty close to dying. In fact, the game's English release was actually cancelled due to the publisher losing faith and dropping the title entirely. However, the developers at Neowitz Games didn't give up, and they've been working solidly to rebuild many of the problematic systems in the game. This all sounds very familiar, and it actually brings to mind the story of Final Fantasy XIV. The big question is, will this be another Realm Reborn, or is it just too late for Bless Online? Well, the good news is we won't be waiting long to find out, as only a few days ago we were given an official release date of May 2018. Now technically this is an early access release, but don't panic, we've been told that the game will only be in early access for around 6 months. We've also been told that all of the data will remain when the game launches, which hopefully means that we can look at it as more of a soft launch than your typical early access situation. Anyway, let's take a look at what Bless Online has to offer us, starting with the world. One of the immediately striking things about Bless is that it looks absolutely stunning. The game offers a pretty expansive open world that doesn't feature excessive invisible barriers or instancing. For me, this is a big tick in the box, as I believe that this should be the default for an MMO game whenever possible. The problem I have with too many barriers and instances is that they make a game start to feel less like an actual world and more like a series of levels. It may just be a personal thing, but that feeling of being part of an expansive open world is a huge contributor to my immersion in an MMO. The game's been built with Unreal Engine 3 and it definitely looks like they've pushed the capabilities of the engine, as previous titles running on the same engine haven't always been this graphically impressive. This can be said for both the level of detail when it comes to items in close proximity, as well as the awesome expansive views that you can see when you look into the distance. The game features some stunning landscapes, and the detail that has gone into the cities is truly impressive. I'd describe the theme itself as medieval high fantasy with an Eastern influence. Now those of you who have watched my previous videos will know that I'm not always a massive fan of the typical Eastern MMO style. The whole metal bikini thing has always made me struggle to take the game seriously. However, when it comes to Bless, it feels like they've actually struck a really nice balance. I'd say the style is actually quite tasteful, and it's actually managed to get me excited about an Eastern title, even despite my skepticism following the game's previous failures. The main worry that I have when it comes to the game world is that due to the sheer scale of it, there are some very empty feeling areas. And these areas aren't really adding anything to the game, and they're lacking any real personality. Whenever I see this in a game, I wonder why they don't just start smaller and add zones when they're fully polished. Otherwise it just feels like they're just adding more and more zones just to be able to say how big the game is. I'm hoping that we'll see the world a little more fleshed out when it comes to the Steam release. However, I am still expecting to see a lot of copy-paste style areas that are probably there to serve as placeholders for later content. Let's move on to character creation and take a look at the factions, races and classes that will be available to us at launch. Bless Online features 2 factions, the Union and the Hiring. And I'm so sorry if I've pronounced that wrong, there are actually a couple of the names in Bless that I haven't heard spoken out loud, so apologies in advance if any of my pronunciation is slightly off. Anyway, these 2 factions are at war with each other, though there isn't any kind of clear good versus evil battle taking place. Think more Alliance versus Horde in WoW than say the Empire versus the Rebel Alliance in Star Wars. Each faction has 3 unique races, and then there's one race that's shared between the 2 factions. This 4th race, known as the Mashu, again sorry if that pronunciation is off, but seemingly these guys haven't made a final decision on which side to fight for in the wider conflict. In terms of the unique races, you have your typical human race for each faction, one of which will probably be the race that I pick as I'm incredibly predictable when it comes to character choice. Each side also features an elf race as well as a human/elf/wolf hybrid kind of race. They actually all look pretty cool in my opinion, apart from the faintly ridiculous looking Mashu who bring to mind the potatoes of Final Fantasy XIV. If you've played that game, you'll probably know what I'm referring to. I will point out that claiming that each faction has unique races is actually a bit of a stretch. Yes, they have slightly different looks and different lore, but when you examine them side by side, they do feel a little copy-paste. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a problem, but it would have been nice to see a little more uniqueness with each race. On the plus side, at least the game doesn't feature gender locking like so many other Eastern titles. Once you've picked your race, you'll be presented with a number of class choices, though do bear in mind that not all classes will be available to every race. The classes are as follows. You have Guardians, who are armed with sword and shield and fight on the front lines. They're essentially an active tank class, and rather than just blocking with their shields and absorbing damage, they have various offensive abilities to put their enemies off guard and exploit weaknesses. You have your Berserker class, and Berserkers are pretty much what you'd expect. They're a powerful close-range cleave class that will deal devastating damage if left unchecked. They're able to absorb a reasonable amount of pain due to their heavy armor, and they're able to disrupt their enemies with stuns and knockdowns. Next up we have the Paladin, who provides another typical MMO class option. Paladins combine the skills of a warrior with those of a priest. They're able to fight on the front line in their heavy armor, as well as providing their allies with support and healing. Then we have Rangers, who are primarily a ranged class who will use their bows to deal devastating damage from afar. The agility from their light armor and their crowd control abilities will allow them to keep at a safe distance from the enemy, as if they're caught, they're very weak in close combat. And finally, we see another classic MMO class with the Mage. Mages will play their typical role of glass cannon. They can deal out enormous single and multi-target damage at range, but they'll have to work hard to avoid close combat if they don't want to be hacked to pieces in a matter of seconds. There are also a few other classes that will be released sometime after launch. These are the Mystic, the Assassin, and the Warlock. However, as they don't seem to be included in the Steam launch, we won't be covering them here. This feels like a solid selection so far, and I'm a big advocate of quality over quantity when it comes to class choices, so you won't get any complaints from me. You will of course be able to personalise your character, and the character customization options are pretty in-depth, as we often see when it comes to Eastern titles. So if you love to spend hours fussing over your character's hair and makeup, then you won't be disappointed. Personally, I'm happy as long as I can give my character a non-ridiculous hairstyle and a few scars to help tell their story. Next up, we're going to take a look at leveling and questing in Bless. As far as the questing experience goes, it's a pretty typical MMO quest system. You already know the deal. Travel here, collect that, talk to this person, kill that person, stomp on this innocent and unsuspecting critter, all the usual stuff. Granted, there's nothing particularly creative going on here. However, I always find it's the storytelling that truly impacts my experience in an MMO rather than the nature of the quests themselves. In the case of Bless Online, a lot of the storytelling is voice acted, which is a massive tick in the box for me personally. It's not that I have a problem with reading quest text, I just feel that good narration can take the experience to a whole other level and really immerse you in the game world. My biggest concern in terms of story is that we might get a bad translation, and that we'll end up missing many of the subtleties in the dialogue. This can really impact the overall quality of the story and make it feel kind of empty. I feel that for all of its merits, Black Desert Online is a game that has really suffered from this. Though admittedly this is a personal opinion and others may disagree entirely. In terms of the questing system itself, there's going to be a lot of visual guidance in terms of arrows pointing you in the right direction and markers on the map, which I'll admit is very convenient, but I'd rather see a little more left to the imagination and actually have to spend a little more time working out where I need to go. Again, it's all about personal preference, and I'm sure you have your own thoughts and feelings when it comes to which questing systems are best. In the case of Bless, I'd say think closer to the questing system in current WoW rather than what we experienced in vanilla. The thing that I'm actually most excited about when it comes to questing and leveling in Bless Online is the difficulty. The game's actually going to present you with a challenge while leveling, meaning that you're actually going to have to think about pulls and make the effort to work with other players to overcome certain fights. This is a massive draw for me and one of the main reasons that I'm willing to give Bless another chance. I just love the idea of challenging content that I can work through with friends when the game comes out. The next major topic I want to address is combat, which is probably the most controversial discussion piece when it comes to Bless Online. The game has received heavy criticism for having a lackluster combat system with previous launches. In previous versions of the game, you were essentially offered a choice of either traditional tab-based combat or an awkward semi-action-oriented combat system that had essentially just been layered on top of the tab targeting system. And therein lies the source of the problem, at least in my opinion. I really don't think the game would have received anywhere near as much criticism if they'd just stuck to one style or the other. I feel that the worst criticism they would have got was that it felt somewhat unoriginal, but instead players reported the combat to be clunky, non-committal, and just not in the same league as many of the other MMO titles on the market. However, the developers are said to be making significant changes to the combat system prior to the Steam launch. Hopefully they've learned from their mistakes, as I think if serious improvements haven't been made, then the game will be dead on arrival. I really don't care what kind of system they decide to implement, as long as it's well deployed and it doesn't feature some wishy-washy mix of tab target and action combat options. As always on this channel, we'll give the benefit of the doubt and hope that developers come through and deliver for us. We'll save our QQ in for if it all goes to shit at launch. The fights themselves actually look really cool, and if they get the combat right, then players will hopefully get to experience and enjoy some really interesting boss encounters and mechanics. There are a few other features I want to discuss before we wrap up, starting with endgame PVE. Specifically, I'm talking about dungeons and raids. There'll be a number of dungeons available both during leveling and after you hit max level. 7 of these dungeons could probably be considered endgame content when it comes to the level of challenge and the quality of gear you can get your hands on. 2 of these 7 will actually be solo dungeons, which isn't all that common in MMOs, and I think it could be an interesting addition. The remainder are your classic 5-man dungeons that will likely be more difficult, as they're going to require the added challenge of coordinating a team. Some of these dungeons are going to feature a hard mode, and this is going to provide a greater level of challenge with stronger enemies and more punishing mechanics. On top of this, we've been told that we can expect to see additional dungeons added to the game in major and hopefully regular content patches. Bless is also going to feature at least 1 raid at launch, and this will be completed with a group of 10. From what I've heard, it should be sufficiently difficult to provide even MMO veterans with a decent level of challenge. But I guess we'll just have to see if that's the case at launch. Both dungeons and raids will of course provide you with some of the more powerful items in the game, though it looks like the game isn't just going to throw gear at you, and it may actually take some time to get your best in slot items. Personally, I think this is actually a very good thing, as it will hopefully stop the content going out of date so quickly. Of course, it wouldn't be fair to talk about endgame content without mentioning the game's PvP. PvP in Bless is focused around the war between the 2 factions. In the open world, you'll be able to fight players of the opposing faction, but not those of your own, unless of course that fight is in the form of a duel. There will be some restrictions in place in the open world to protect lower level players, and you can expect to see low level zone protection, as well as NPC guards featuring at neutral camps. Essentially all of the usual open world PvP stuff. Outside of world PvP, the game will feature both 3v3 arenas and large scale 100 versus 100 battlegrounds. These battlegrounds will focus around various game modes and objectives. I believe there may also be other PvP modes available, but at this stage I can't find reliable information, so I've chosen to skip them in this video. Interestingly, there's going to be a ranking system in place that actually sounds a lot like the vanilla WoW ranking system to me. The top ranks will only be attainable by a limited number of players each week, which I actually think is really cool, even though I know that I'll never have a chance of getting one of those ranks. Finally, Bless is going to feature PvP specific gear, and from what I understand it will have an impact on your strength in PvP. There will of course be plenty of other features to explore, such as a fully implemented crafting system and tameable mounts and pets. But as this is intended to be a brief overview of the game, we're not going to go into depth on these. They're actually fairly standard MMO systems that we kind of expect to be in place at this point. Overall, I'd say I'm actually quite surprised by my excitement levels when it comes to Bless Online. Considering that I don't often get on with Eastern MMOs, combined with the fact that this game isn't really doing anything innovative, and that it suffered a number of failures and setbacks before it even launches in the West. Considering all this, it does seem like a strange title for me to be looking forward to. But despite all of the negatives, there are certain features that really appeal to me. I like the look of the open world, I like the class options, and in particular I'm excited about the promise of challenging PvE content both during leveling and at endgame. If they manage to fix the combat, then I think Bless actually has a solid chance of success in the West. If not, I think it's probably not going to be around for very long. In terms of the financial model, Bless is going to be a buy-to-play title that will feature a cash shop. We've been told that there won't be any pay-to-win elements, but that you will be able to pay for some convenience and time-saving features. Personally, I'm not a fan of this at all, but I guess the game has to monetize in some way, and it doesn't currently have the strength to support a subscription model, considering its shaky history. Anyway, that's enough from me. You've heard my thoughts on Bless Online, and I look forward to hearing yours in the comments down below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to my channel for regular content. You can expect weekly MMO and RPG videos, as well as regular live streams on both YouTube and Twitch. I've also recently set up a Patreon page if you want to be extra awesome and support me on there. All links are in the description. Either way, take care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.